Hello and welcome to Brainstorms. I'm really excited about today's podcast because this is April and we are celebrating Earth Day. And we're celebrating Earth Day with one of my favorite all-time veterans who has brought together so many different parts of his military service in his post-military career that I can't wait till you hear from him. We are going virtual today. I am talking to Don Tobul, who is up in East Lake, Ohio. We're here in the beautiful Sycamore Studios in Plain City, Ohio. So he's in Northeast sector, I'm in the Central sector, and I'm just going to let Don take it away. Hello, Don. Welcome to Earth Day here.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Gordon. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about OD greens a little bit and put a little bit of optics on veteran mental health in particular.
Oh, thank you so much. And why don't we just jump into your story? Because honestly, it's one of the more fascinating stories. Now, by the way, I do say that about many veterans, but it is a very fascinating way that you all can kind of maneuver a post-military career. And with you, it was kind of multiple iterations of a civilian career to what I think is just going to be a perfect thing for our veterans and the state of Ohio going forward. So I'm going to let you kind of tell a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you brought up the state of Ohio because I think that's really where my journey kind of began. I was in my undergraduate program at Bowling Green State University. I was pursuing a bachelor's degree in education at that point in time. College was expensive, and during that era, Ohio was offering 100% college tuition assistance for enlisting into the Ohio National Guard. And so that's what I did in January of 2001. Okay. And during my basic training, I actually experienced September 11th. So everything changed from that point forward, and I've kind of been pivoting in and out of my life ever since. So I found myself not just being a National Guardsman after I finished basic training, not after going back to Bowling Green to continue my education, but then I ultimately found myself on active duty in Iraq in 2004 and 2005.
So you just jumped right into this. I mean, you just, signed up and they're 911 and you are there. So that's, a big pivot. All right.
Yeah, well, timing's never been my strongest suit, and things happen, and I think that this kind of sets the framework for my new take on mental health and the way I operate in my own life. You can have expectations, but sometimes those expectations aren't realized, and so we have to pivot, and we have to deal with the circumstances as they come. And so in Iraq, I was supposed to be an 88 Mike where we would drive in vehicles, but the types of vehicles that we had in our unit, they weren't really good for hauling anything, and so they made them into basically gun trucks, and we would escort civilian and military convoys throughout the country, as far south as Kuwait and up north as Al-Assad, almost to the Syrian border. So got to see quite a bit of the country, got to keep people safe, civilian and military personnel alike. And all in all, I took away from it a really good experience. And
it's a very dangerous job. I mean, you're glancing over it, as all, you veterans do, but that's a very dangerous situation to have been in, particularly at that time and in that place in the world. So we thank you for, risking all for us, seriously.
Well, I do appreciate that. And yeah, I think that we do have a tendency to kind of glance over the danger of it, right? But it during that time is your job, and so you're focused on that, and you're focused on keeping the people around you safe and good, and carrying out the mission. And so I think that distraction has the way of us kind of maybe, like you say, glazing over it a little bit. But again, it was the job, and that's what we were there to do, and do it well is the bottom line, right?
Right.
And so in 2005, that deployment wrapped up. I cycled back stateside. And being a National Guardsman, I found myself, we came back in March of 2004, and I was back in the classroom in May of that same year. So it was like not even 6 weeks later. So from combat zone to classroom, 6 weeks. And that was an eye-opening experience in itself, too, because, the military put so much training and time and energy and resources and money into getting everybody ready to go into combat. Then on the back end, it's not there. Right. And they just kind of turn you over to the civilian world and say, okay, best of luck to you.
Yeah.
At least this is how it was in 2005 at that time.
Yeah.
And I found myself back in the classroom. And so campuses, I think, have shifted since then as well. But at Bowling Green in 2005, there were no veteran centers. There were no, some campuses even have like a special study area for veterans. None of that existed at that time. And so, I got back into it, and I just kept the nose to the grindstone and plunged away at it. And I finished my degree in August of 2006.
Oh, that's remarkable. Remarkable. Congratulations. Yeah.
Well, and then I became a teacher. So I taught high school chemistry, physics, and ninth grade integrated science for a period of 5 years. And as a requirement of being an educator in the state of Ohio, you had to pursue a master's degree. And so I found myself kind of torn in between, where I was at that time in 2006, 2007, 2008, and getting back involved with the military and veteran communities. And so I pursued my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling at John Carroll University up here in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And I earned that degree in 2013. And I accepted a position with the VA as a vocational rehabilitation counselor, where I worked for a period of 8 years. And so I worked with disabled veterans to help them get the training and essential skills necessary to overcome any barriers that they would have to transition from the military mindset into civilian employment.
And that's a lot of transition. I mean, when you went to the classroom, you kind of went from an area in the Mideast that was almost operating on the rural level several centuries behind, and you come back to stateside here, and we're kind of in the tech age, as well as maybe the more self-absorbed, population in humanity. So that had to have been a struggle for you. And I just don't want to downplay how easy you're saying all these transitions are, because they're not. They take a lot of grit on your part, and we are so proud of you for that. And that's what makes you a leader for others as well.
Well, and I think you hit it right. I mean, it's the cradle of civilization over there. And I mean, you can focus on the bad and the ugly about it, or you can focus on the opportunity I had to go back to this amazing place in history. Mm-hmm. And you're right. The people there are fantastic people for the most part. And the people that I met and interacted with and engaged with, they're great. They're just trying to make a living and do their life the best that they can with what they're given as well. The kids over there, this picture that I took stands out in my mind. Barefoot and just out on the street on 120-degree sand, and it's not fazing them. And so when I came back to the classroom and everybody's got their new Air Jordans or the newest fashion on, it has a way to shift your perspective of what's important and what we have a tendency here to take for granted. Right. So you're right, it does have a way to shift that perspective.
Right. So now you're back and you're in the VA and you're saying, what?
Yeah, so at my time in the VA, again, it was a great opportunity to get an inside view of this enormous system, right?
Yes.
The VA, for people that don't necessarily know, it's comprised of 3 different components. There's the hospital side, there's the benefits side, and then there's the cemetery side. And so I was associated or affiliated with the benefits side through my position as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. And like I said, we work with veterans to get them the employment and training needed to obtain and maintain suitable employment that wouldn't negatively impact their disabilities. And I think the idea and the theory of that position and that program is probably one of the best things that the VA has to offer. In application, I don't think that it is done very well. And at the end of the day, I think that is what kind of drove me to what I'm currently doing in private practice. And so I had this mentality that, hey, I'm going to come into the VA and I'm going to work with other veterans and it's going to be awesome and I'm going to change the world, I'm going to change the system and everybody's going to be happy.
Right.
And it didn't happen that way, And
Yes.
so again, we talked about expectations at the beginning of this. You can get frustrated or you can deal with the circumstances as they come and you can adjust and you can pivot.
Right,
And
exactly.
So I sought to launch my own business I think it was actually 2018.
Okay.
But I had to unroll it in a very tactical fashion because I was still an employee with the VA.
Okay.
And I didn't want there to be any kinds of conflicts of interest. And
Okay.
so my business, for listeners out there, is really comprised of two components. What we do at OD Greens, which is the name of my business, is we use hydroponic farming and urban agriculture as a platform for mental health and workplace training for disabled veterans.
Okay,
And
now
so-
that's a mouthful. That is a lot. If we can extract a little, if you don't mind, because I know everything that you said, I had no idea what it was before I started reading about you. So if we could just talk about the name that you chose, because one of the things I want to tell our listening audience and all of our veterans and their families is your website is one of the most helpful, friendly, amazing places to go, odgreens.com. But how did you get that name?
Well, it's a nod to the military component that brought me here, right?
Okay.
And most military personnel will recognize the term OD green as olive drab green color.
Oh, okay, okay.
And that's the color of the majority of military basic issued equipment. It's this color. It's what I've got on today, right?
Okay,
So I can't get away from it. It follows me everywhere.
Okay.
But in the senses of my business, OD Greens, it stands for occupational development,
Okay.
with the greens component coming from the urban agriculture and the hydroponic farming.
Okay, so let's next go with urban agriculture. Tell us a little bit what you mean by that.
This is just my working definition. I don't have the book
that's
definition
great.
for like any of this, but urban agriculture to me is when you are growing produce or plants or food in an area that you wouldn't necessarily anticipate seeing that. I mean, you go
Okay.
out to like rural Ohio, you see cornfields, you expect that.
Right.
I'm in Eastlake. There is a baseball stadium, like a stone throw, or a baseball throw, I should say, from
Okay.
my company.
Yes.
It's concrete jungle, so there's nothing like viable land here to grow. And so in Cleveland, and in the Cleveland area, we're not necessarily known for sunny days. We're not necessarily
Right.
known for a great climate. And so the urban agriculture and the type of farming that I do here, I'm able to control it. So I can create artificial sun and I can create artificial rain, and I basically make produce where it wouldn't otherwise grow.
Okay, now is that the hydroponics part of this, or is that separate from hydroponics?
I think that's more at the urban agriculture, growing
Gotcha.
things where you wouldn't anticipate them growing.
Okay,
The
gotcha.
hydroponics really alludes more to the way we grow.
Okay.
So for people, again, that don't know, hydro means from water, right? So hydroponics is literally we're growing plants from nutrient-rich water rather than using soil.
Oh, and I think that was the most fascinating thing to me. So tell me a little bit about how you do that, because the benefits of that, particularly in an area, I'm from Northeast Ohio. I'm from Youngstown. So Northeast Ohio, when you get Eastlake, you're talking about feet of snow. You're not talking about inches. You talk about feet. And when I was told by a member of our board, Paul Carlson, who's very much in the environmental space, that you had been recommended by a woman named Karen Kennedy, who was in charge of the Agricultural Healing Institute. Using growing things to help people grow spiritually, physically, brain health-wise, mental health-wise. So tell us a little bit about the hydroponics and how you got going with this, because honestly, to the listening audience, this is like 22nd century stuff to me. I'm really, really excited. So you went from, way back in the dark ages to the future in a very short period of time. So tell us a little about this hydroponics.
Well, so I think that this component of my business comes with another story, of course.
Okay.
My wife and I, we had gotten married and we'd bought this new house, and this was, I guess, fast forward to 2013. And, I was still kind of trying to find my way through life and trying to figure out exactly what it is that I wanted to do. And I started to grow, actually, chili peppers for a friend of mine who was also
wow.
a veteran. And so He was selling his chili peppers to somebody else who was making extremely hot sauce out of them. And I really found that was fun and fulfilling on some component. Then I got down the YouTube rabbit hole and I started watching videos about aquaponics at that time. So aquaponics uses fish culture to effectively poop in the water, and then the poop-filled water is used by the plants as nutrients to then grow.
Okay.
And so I asked my wife, I said, what would you think if I built a aquaponics system in our basement?
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
There's no way she's going to let me do this. There's zero chance. And she's like, yeah, do whatever you want down there.
Oh, whoa.
So she called my bluff, and I'm like, now I got to do it. So because I put it out there. And so the first iteration of OD Greens really was an aquaponics system that I built from reclaimed, repurposed materials in my basement. And
amazing.
I've got pictures, I think, on my website from there, and it was an absolute jungle of growth down there. So I said, wow, this is really an amazing use of a very small space. Mm-hmm. And by the way, it feels really good. It's therapeutic. And tell
me a little bit, okay. First of all, I want to give a shout out to your great ingenuity, all righty? And I want to tell all the potential employers out there, this is why veterans are so important in your business. I mean, here you are, you go to YouTube, you look at this and say, I can do that. By the way, I'm going to do it in my basement. And then you see a massive, that is not something that absolutely everybody in our nation is doing. So I want to commend you for that and want to tell folks, particularly employers, why that is so important. And I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just had to make that statement of your ingenuity.
Well, and I wanted to take the opportunity, too, to encourage people to do that. Be curious and challenge themselves to pursue these things, because a lot of the times they'll find them therapeutic or fulfilling or whatever word you want to use in there to become an extension of who they are, right? And I think that's really what that system down there did for me. I was able to build something with my hands, and I was able to make it good, and then I was able to iterate it and make it better, and then iterate again and make it better. So like you adapt it and you modify it and you make it your own, so that it does the thing that you need it to do within your parameters, and it's a really great thing to have.
Well, that's fascinating. I will say, I volunteered at the VA in 2008, 2009 to do the second level traumatic brain injury screenings. And that's where that is where you all just like captured me. Captured me. And I remember speaking to one veteran in particular who had done something very creative. And what I thought was, as strange as it may seem, is a line from the musical Rent. And it was the first time and the only time I've heard this line when they said the opposite of peace, the opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation. Mm-hmm. And what you are doing is you are making something out of what started to be fish poop, right? And now you can feed the world. So that is absolutely amazing. Okay, so I didn't mean to interrupt your story, but those are very important points for people who are still trying to find their way. And when you talk about good for yourself, what other things did you notice besides the fact that you kind of took charge and made something really great happen?
Well, it didn't start out all great.
Okay.
And so, there was a lot. Like I said, I have a saying here where it's try, develop, fail, iterate, repeat.
Okay, gotcha. Very good.
That's what it is. So I think that people in general, they look at failure, and I throw up failure in air quotes there because I think it's a misnomer, right? Like you haven't failed at anything. You've learned something about maybe a way not to do it. And I think that's how this thing became successful, was because I failed so much, and there's always resistance and there's always barriers. But when you work through those, the reward at the end becomes even better.
Right. So what sort of things did you notice that you may have struggled with before in terms of your brain health that you began noticing were different now?
I think that, and if my wife were here, she would corroborate this.
Okay.
She would say patience, so
I was wondering.
quick to react, quick to respond, quick to anger sometimes, and being angry while you're trying to make something work or trying to get components moving in synchronicity with one another, like, it's not beneficial. You realize, like, wow, I am becoming the barrier here. It's
Very
nothing to do with what I'm building. It's me. And that's such a great metaphor for mental health. Once I was able to get out of my own way and, go back to YouTube and say, I've got this problem. How do I address this problem? Because the information that's out there, I mean, you could Google or YouTube anything and there will be a solution found, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so this breadth of knowledge is at our fingertips, and that's what you do. Once you are able to get past the frustration and get out of your own way, then you can start building and being successful.
Yeah. Well, that is wonderful, and it is a wonderful lesson too. But, to your benefit, to the benefit of all of our veterans, whether they were in combat or not in combat, but it's even more important in combat, quick reactions are life and death. Yeah. I mean, so you've spent what, a 14-month deployment, plus you spent several months before that in training. We have in our military, that training system that act now,
right.
And not that medical, practices anything quite like that, but I did do a stint in the ER, which I enjoyed very much. And in the ER, it's react really quickly, and I noted the same thing. So I'd go home and like, why aren't things happening here?
Yeah.
I said to give me an amp. Where is it? So that's a very good thing about the patients. And I don't believe that, even though I understand, and you can explain it to our audience about the faster growing time, it's still kind of slow to watch a plant grow, isn't it? I mean, unless you got a chia pet or something. I mean, it's kind of
I'm not in the farm watching them grow, Dr. Gordon. They just kind of do it on their own.
But you're in the basement. You got to go down to the basement. You say, oh, wait, there's an extra leaf,
Yeah, you get those little snapshots of the progress and the fact that it's carrying on in your absence. It's even better. It's like, wow. So I put this whole thing into motion and I gave it what it needed. Wow. And now I can walk away and it's going to do its thing for a period of time. Don't walk away forever, right?
All
right. So you got to attend to it. You got to care for it. You got to put work into it. All of those things. But yeah, if you keep your conditions set and your system clean and you meet all the parameters within that system, the thing's going to go.
Okay. So then what was your next step? So now you've got product. That's a whole other job, what you do once you have product. I mean, isn't it? And you do it all, I understand. But, here you are.
I've got a bit of a control issue. We'll get to that probably eventually.
Okay.
Here too. But yeah, I do my marketing, I do my sales, I do my own website, I do the mental health counseling, I do my billing and coding, I do it all. Yeah, for sure. But when I first started out with growing, I had all this produce. Well, What do I do with it? Was the question. And I said, there's probably a market. Somebody would probably buy it. But I started out by just sampling it to local restaurants, bringing some
smart.
to my neighbors, giving it to my parents. My mom's an entrepreneur herself, so she had customers that she would give the stuff to. And so word got out that, hey, this stuff is really good and it lasts super long because it's not sitting on a shelf or it's not in a truck and it's not being transported across thousands of miles, right?
And what were you growing beside chili peppers?
What wasn't I growing at that time?
Okay.
I was throwing everything at the wall just to see what stuck, right? So a lot of different like specialty herbs, basil, Thai basil, lettuces. I was doing watercress, celery. Celery, if you haven't had locally grown or hydroponic celery, you've never had
I have
celery.
not. Okay.
It's the best. I mean, you put it in soup, it's a game changer.
Okay.
But I was throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick. But ultimately, when I went to upgrade to a commercial level, I had to figure out, well, number one, what are people going to buy? Okay. And I don't want this to become a produce business. So how do I make sure that this component of my business, the produce growing, the hydroponic growing component, sustains itself?
Okay.
Right? So you had to figure out margins and you had to figure out pricing and all of that. So within my business plan, the produce is a break even. The lettuce that I currently grow sustains the farm, my electric, turns on my lights, covers
Wow.
my rent, all of that. And then I do the mental health now, fast forward as I transitioned out of the VA, as a way to make my own living.
Oh, that's just amazing. And for our veterans that may be wondering, what they're going to do with our next step, you just named about 7 different, occupations within this occupation that you're doing, on your own, but that could be set up if they wanted to, like get a group together to do something like this. So I just find it absolutely fascinating. Now, do you have a large 40-foot container, or that's what I read on YouTube. So I'm just asking you because that just absolutely blew my mind. Seriously.
Yeah. So in 2018, I purchased a 40-foot vertical hydroponic farm, which I currently use, and inside 320 square feet of foot space there, we do 2.5 acres of produce.
2.5 acres down to 320
square feet.
Square feet. That's amazing. And you mentioned something to me in kind of our preview that the growing cycle is different too, because you don't have to worry about the winter winds across Lake Erie or whatever. So if you could just inform us in that.
Yeah, so like I said before, Cleveland isn't known for its sunny climates, right? And so we need to have a way to make the plants happy. And so we use artificial LED lighting, and we use our nutrient-rich water and a lot of different microorganisms within there as well. But we grow 365 days a year in this area of the world, and we're producing anywhere between 55 and 65 pounds of produce every single week to get out to the local community.
Oh, that's amazing. So particularly when things like the pandemic comes along, and food security in many areas was, under siege, seriously. I was amazed at the veterans that I knew that took this as, I consider our military the most fascinating people that we have. And we're going to touch on that service gene that I was telling you about too later. But it is fascinating that you make order out of chaos everywhere. And when we had issues with food security, you also did the same thing. So you got through the pandemic with getting your goods to the people in your community, right?
Yeah, so I think I said once on this podcast already that timing's not my thing.
Okay.
And so I'll take you back to my employment with the VA. It was a planned resignation.
Okay.
And that date of exit from the VA was Friday, the 13th of 2020.
When we closed down the state. Okay.
And so, Monday was the first day of full COVID closures. And so I'm at home thinking, okay, well, now what? So again, you pivot. Nobody was going out and about, and the farmers market that was set to start up here wasn't happening at that point in time.
Okay.
But like you said, I think veterans are wired in a way where when people are running that way, we're going that way. And so it painted a unique opportunity in my mind anyways to say, all right, well, what am I going to do with this, and how can I make the best out of this situation once again?
Okay.
And so I continued my farm operations here, and I was still doing everything that I could do within there to maximize my produce and get that out to the community. So I would load it up in a trailer, and I would go down to where the farmers market was held, put out a blast on my social media, send out some emails, and people would come and they would buy it. And I was the only person in the lot on a lot of these late winter, early spring days building up to the market. And people would buy we had duck eggs, we had, I think, goose eggs and chicken eggs at the time too, lettuces, basil, microgreens, and I would sell everything that I was growing.
I do really find that fascinating. And, I commend your entire family and the way that you've helped with the community there, because that is a lot of pivot shifts. First of all, I have to point out the fact, just from being a chemistry major myself that, you took chemistry and physics, and everything you're doing here is biology and botany. I mean, so you've got a lot of parts of your brain that are working at the same time. So I'm fascinated about that just because of my brain science mind there. It really is very fascinating.
And there's a lot of physics in there too, with wavelengths of light and what's optimal for the
yeah.
plants that you're growing, and the chemistry comes into that, of course, as well. So like, I think that is also an acknowledgement of these different experiences that we have in our lives, and how we may not know how they'll be useful at the time we're doing them or learning them. And then later on in life, it becomes apparent that I needed to have that experience in order to succeed at what it is that I'm doing here.
And I think that's a really important life lesson. You're young to learn it. I didn't learn it for about 20 years after you did. But it really is true that you can look back and say, okay, what I thought was a failure was actually a step. It was actually a step forward, but I thought it was several steps back. And that's a really good attitude to have for brain health as well.
Yeah.
I do think that also the physicality of it all. I mean, I know you're not out there plowing the back 40 or whatever, but I mean, you've got to be reaching, you've got to be bending, you've got to be twisting, you've got to be lifting, you've got to be sorting. I mean, you are really training all of your body, the brain, the spirit, the physical body to work as a unit as well. And I think that, as I say, the best way to train anything is to do the activity. So I don't know if you've noticed that with some of your clients, with some of your other veterans, the kind of just healthfulness of being outside in the summer and outside in the spring as well.
Well, we say motion is the lotion here, so it's like stay in motion, and that's going to help maybe kind of hone some good skills, some good habits, and keep you moving forward in the right direction. And while I don't think any kind of agriculture or any kind of farming is completely void of physical activity, the system that we grow on is highly accommodating. The most that somebody would lift was maybe 5 to 10 pounds on any given day. There's not a lot of bending or stooping because everything we grow is vertical. So inside our farm there's 256 towers of produce. Each tower has 10 to 15 plants inside the towers. And so as you pick up this tower, which is effectively a PVC fence post, if you will, it's a very thin mill PVC. You pick it up, take it out, and it's loaded with produce. Fully loaded, it's probably 10 pounds at max.
That's amazing, particularly because, when we have our veterans who have been injured, like I said, a lot of veterans get injured in training. I mean, I found that out. And so maybe they don't have the mobility that the same 30-year-old has, who has not been that way. Although, unless you're a very phenomenal athlete, those of us that are not get into that same problem in our 30s, from trying to do things that we couldn't quite do. But this is something that you're saying is really very doable, despite some restrictions that you may have.
Yeah, no, I agree exactly with that. Some people can't lift 10 pounds, and so, again, we can accommodate that. We've got a trolley system inside the farm that we can load the towers onto and move them for the individual, so it's literally pushing the towers with a finger as opposed to carrying back and forth. Everything is at, I guess, like mid-waist abdomen level, so you're not bending over, you're not hunched over, you're not reaching for anything. And so, again, we can accommodate pretty much any disability with inside the farm there.
The other thing that I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong on this because I may not have the correct understanding, but that your way of farming also decreases the amount of like fertilizer or chemicals that we put either in the food or into the ground if the food is being grown there. Is that correct? Or?
Well, we live in an interesting area here in Ohio, right? So we're in the Lake Erie watershed, and so the way of getting fertilizer into plants in fields is basically spreading it, right? And so then after you spread that fertilizer onto that field, of course, timing's probably not going to be great. It's going to rain. And so as it rains, what does it do? Is it washes all of that fertilizer into the streams and the rivers and eventually back into the lake. And that leads to some of the issues we have with algal blooms here in Lake Erie. And for our purposes, we don't do that, right? So we have
Right.
140 gallons of nutrient water inside the farm here that I try to repurpose whenever I possibly can. And as I clean one tank out, capture that nutrient-rich water, put it on my own plants at home, so we're not just using it and dumping it. You know, it's not just going to the watersheds. We also collect all of the condensate inside the farm, and so we use about 10% of the water that traditional farming uses.
Wow.
Because we capture it out of the air, we recycle it, we filter it, and we put it right back into the system. We're not losing it to the atmosphere like traditional farming does.
I got to tell you, again, knew very little, next to nothing. And when I started reading it, and then again, when I went to your website, odggreens.com, that is just, I am not a tech savvy person, but it was very easy to maneuver around. And you have times on there where people can come to your farm. Is that correct? Like, open for business X amount of hours of the day. So tell us a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, you can come and you can visit me. I would ask that you do set up some kind of an appointment so that I can schedule around the mental health counseling and make sure that nobody else is in the farm at that point in time. But yeah, you can come and check it out. Like I said, we have 256 towers in there. And I think an interesting part of my website too is the honor page.
Let's talk about that honor pages. I would say, I would call it pages. And I will tell you, it literally took my breath. If you could explain that a bit, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, so when you're starting a business, a lot of the times funding is an issue. And a good friend of mine gave me an idea, and I absolutely loved the idea after he said it. But basically, if you're building a new building, right, you could sponsor a brick to your family or something of that nature, and that helps to kind of defer some of the cost of the actual building, right?
Right.
And so when I purchased the farm, he said, why don't you do something similar? You've got 256 towers. Why don't you make this a living, breathing monument for people to have some kind of stake in what it is that you're building here? I said, well, that's such a good idea. I've got to run with that. And so that's what we did. We bootstrapped it. I was working at the VA, kind of putting funding away to purchase the farm as well. But then a lot of the people I encountered wanted to be a part of it and its growth as well. And so this was the opportunity that they had to do that. And so they could purchase a tower for, I think it was $25. And that $25 got them the ability to talk about a person, a place, a thing, or an event that is near and dear to them. And inside the farm, their tower will be marked with a number. And on our website, there's a story, there's usually a picture that corresponds with the number tower, and it talks about that remembrance of the person, place, or event.
And you have a lot that are from your family itself, right? I mean, you're from a military service family. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so my grandmother and grandfather on my dad's side had 4 boys, and those 4 boys went into the Marine Corps, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army. My dad was in the Army. So we covered effectively, I think, at that time, all of the bases, exception Coast Guard, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's my immediate family's history. But since then, I think that again, maybe this is where we're leading here, is that service component, right, of my family. So I can't tell you how many cousins and other relatives and extended family have now served as well. But we're pretty deep in the military culture at this point.
Well, it's very interesting. Again, my very narrow and deep space is in brain health, but we've actually identified a service gene. Okay. And it does show that it goes in families. So when you talk about families, and yours very impressive to get everything but Coast Guard, particularly when you're on Lake Erie. I'm saying, how did you miss that one? You needed
maybe
one.
We wanted to get out of Ohio.
Oh, maybe that was it too. Yeah, exactly. Could have been that. But I mean, this particular gene, and I think we all need to be aware of this, it seems to be dying out in our population. Okay. And I don't know how it is worldwide, but in the United States of America, it appears to be dying out. And when we take a look at statistics, and these are very sobering statistics to me, the fact that less than 1% of our population, of goes into the military now. I mean, when you take a look at the news and the fires that are everywhere on our planet right now, and we're talking about not only military conflicts, but flooding and earthquakes and tsunamis, and it is as if, Deepak Chopra always says that Mother Nature is, mirroring us. We are chaotic right now, and Mother Nature is, but there is a lot of chaos in the world. And the people that you need to make order out of chaos are getting fewer and farther between, which is why so many of you then serve and continue serving. And if you don't get that service feeling, you don't feel like you're fulfilled. Whereas the 99% of the population, likes to be served instead. So it's something that with this podcast, we really do want to bring that awareness that, we in the United States of America, to survive as a united people, need to realize that, and need to realize that so many of our first responders actually served in the military as well. Like you said, people who run into fires and run into gunfire while everybody else is running in their way, less than 1%. So I really commend you for that. And I thank you for bringing it up. And I really do. I'm seriously, this is like, I really want our listeners to take a look at your website and see that, because it's all different conflicts too. I mean, it just really is an amazing thing. It kind of takes me back to what my grandfather told me. My grandfather was actually a pilot in World War I. Now, I say that with quotes because he was trained. How he got from East Liverpool, Ohio, to Minnesota to train in the Army Air Corps when there were no cars or anything, I have no idea. And he was trained for 2 years, and they were getting ready to send him over to Germany when they realized he was only 16. He had arrived there at 14. He had been trained in, and we're talking biplanes,
Right.
At age 16, I got back. But it was something that really, stuck with me. Like, how many of us would be willing to do something like that today? We're getting fewer. So I think this is going to be, it's our Earth Day. We're kind of celebrating the entire month of April. April's kind of our foundations month, because the resurrection month, everything goes around to renewal and comes back up. And that's why I thought this was just a perfect topic to bring in, because you yourself have renewed yourself and your community and your family and your state and your nation. And that's all trickling down. And I just can't say enough good things about what all you're doing. And I've got to come up there, and I've got to meet your wife too. Because I don't know of many people who would say, oh, sure, honey, grow plants in our basement.
Yeah, she's one of a kind, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I hear that about a lot of military wives. They are, and we're going to have some of them on our podcast. You tell her she's next, okay? Because we really want to get things from the flip side as well. Because again, so many military spouses, whether you're the male spouse or the female spouse, you go through a lot of different things, as do your children and your family, and we've got to bring all of those out to light too. Well, in closing, what kind of things would you tell us here? I mean, you are making Ohio. I mean, this to me is just amazing that in my neck of the woods, Northeast Ohio, where, you're in a winter coat 6 months of the year and occasionally the other 3, You've got 3 months of summer and the other ones are all suspect,
Right.
So what would you like to tell us here?
It's great, here at OD Greens, I show up to work most days in shorts and a T-shirt, because it's always 65 or 70 and sunny inside the farm, and that's a great place to be. So we can create that artificial summer for anybody that comes out here. Where we're at now, and we're really pushing hard to differentiate ourselves a little bit. Yeah, we grow produce, but we want to make sure that people understand that the produce that we grow is serving a higher mission, and that's to support the workplace training and mental health for veterans who are trying to find their way back through life, right? And we talked about the military and civilian connection and the service gene a little bit, but also trying to look at food maybe as the thing that connects military and civilian populations. All people need food, and if a veteran can come in and they can grow food and they can see that what work they're doing is benefiting the greater community, what better way to serve after this other service, right? Giving people what they need to maintain healthy lives, to maintain good diets, to feel good about themselves, and to be good to themselves, right?
Oh,
So
absolutely.
I think that's what we're trying to do is differentiate again, to shift away from OD Greens as a produce company, to say that veterans are welcome here and that they have a place and they can benefit the communities that they're working inside of.
That is just wonderfully said, and I hope to get up there again soon and to get to meet Karen Kennedy as well, because this whole Horticultural Therapy Institute, and then there's an Agricultural Therapy Institute, and I didn't realize until I met you that agriculture deals a lot more with the animals than the horticulture does. I mean, these are things that maybe I knew about way back, not to this degree, but you kind of hear the terms back in grade school and not since then. And I think for people to be able to see your farm and see that it is doable, and all of the different, like I said, job that you have taken on as this, it's just fascinating. And we cannot thank you enough for being our first virtual podcast for Brainstorms. We really do. You've really helped my brain stimulate it a lot by the things that now I want to learn more. And I think that that's just amazing. And we really thank you for helping to bridge that civilian military gap, and also for helping to bring our veterans to safety within the civilian world. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Again, putting optics on this, spreading the word, and getting people to understand that it's more than just growing plants. It's about serving a community.
It's also growing lives. Yes, it's growing futures, right?
That's right.
Right.
For sure.
Thank you so much, Don. We so appreciate you. You take care now.
Thank you. You as well.
Bye-bye. Mm-hmm. So this was a wonderful Earth Day podcast, I think. And it's for the entire season of spring, renewal, finding yourself, doing new things, creativity. And I think that we are so blessed to have veterans like Don Tobul who find their own way. And not only do they find their own way of making order out of chaos in the civilian world, but they drag their veterans with them, their brothers and sisters with them. And we in the civilian world, that 99%, it is our obligation to help them along the way. So please, take a look at their websites. Buy things that are veteran grown, that are veteran made. Make them know that they are an integral part of our society, not just when they go over there and fight for us, but we still need them when they come back here. And thank you all for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again on Brainstorms.
If you are thinking about harming yourself or attempting suicide, tell someone who can help right away. Call 911 for emergency services. Go to the nearest hospital emergency room. Call or text 988 to connect with the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. This podcast is made possible thanks to a grant from the Overwatch Alliance, and it's produced by the Resurrecting Lives Foundation at the Sycamore Studio. Music is written, performed, and graciously provided by Tim Bakel. Remember, when you work toward brain injury recovery, it is best to journey with a friend and keep your gait steady and your spirit strong. Finally, always seek shelter from your storms.
From Baghdad to Basra, the Boston to Bakersfield, the hottest battle I ever fought is raging inside of me. My brain has been battered, scrambled and rattled, and no one knows what's going on with me.